Actually, I'm from Leitrim. That wasn't a joke. I lived there with the beloved, and at one stage, after about 12 years with her, I thought maybe I shouldn't live in Leitrim, maybe I should live in Paris. We were having rows about the dishwasher. She was stuffing it with dishes. And then when she'd be out of the house, I'd half fill it and turn it on, and then she'd come home and say, "Why'd you not fill the dishwasher?" I realized that a man must have his own dishwasher. Man must be free. I thought I could live in Paris with my own dishwasher. And I'd meet an infinite amount of beautiful women, and they'd all be French. So I left, and I got as far as Mullingar. Technically, it is actually closer to Paris. I didn't realize that my time on earth was running out, as it will for all of us, and I was getting scared unconsciously, and so I started to work really hard. I'm a storyteller. I do theatre, I do books, and I do the newspaper. I just tell stories, but I really started working hard, and I was kind of working too hard. Like, I took a gig in Shanghai for 2 nights, playing a flute, and I don't play a flute, you know. I can act playing a flute. But Gare Saint-Lazare sent me across the world with a flute. And people, there's a beautiful translator, and she'd meet me at the airport, you know, and say, "You're the musician." You know, I was treated like I was Ashkenazi or somebody. Anyway, the beautiful translator asked me out for dinner on the last night, and I went with her. And that was a mistake. She brought me to a fish restaurant, and they served something. It looked like now a carcass that might have come up out of the Titanic, you know. I knew I was in trouble, and within a couple of hours I was glued to the toilet in the hotel. And they said that I got some sort of Asian bug that I never recovered from. This is no joke, by the way. This is my sad story, but anyway. Glad you are taking it funny. So I came back with this strange virus, and I had a tour lined up for 6 months that I didn't want to drop out of, so I started taking antibiotics, then I started getting chest infections, then I started taking steroids. Then I got a driver who'd get me out of bed at 4 o'clock and drive me to Driecht or somewhere in the country, and I'd do my show for 2 hours and come home and think, "God, I'm a great fella." So eventually I collapsed, and my health collapsed. I got all sorts of nasty things that I don't really, well, it's no mystery, but you know, colitis and rashes and fucking prostates exploding like big balloons. It was pretty nasty, kind of. Pretty nasty for the poor doctors who had to deal with me. But when it was over, I was completely burnt out, and when I was burnt out, I got completely depressed. And I was in a really dark space for the first time in my life. And I learned a whole lot of things, because the woman who came down to Mullingar to mind me and take me home, of course, was the beloved. And sickness makes you vulnerable. And sickness can be beautiful in the way that it allows you to rediscover tenderness, that you're not in control and that you need people. And I found myself opening up in a huge way that I hadn't for years. And I also found the word shame came back to me from childhood, because shame is something that can be put on you in childhood. It can be the wrapper around the secret. And it can be very difficult, and it can be very disabling. And I think, I write about men all the time in their shame, really. Because when I look at a building like this, I actually am attracted to it. But I'm kind of ashamed to tell you that. And I'm ashamed of God in a sense, of the time that I've spent worshipping. And I'm ashamed of my own kind of sterility, my own kind of existential obsession with death. And shame then disempowers you because you become ashamed of what you're ashamed of. And I discovered one day back in Leitrim, I was with the beloved, and she says, will we go down and look at the lake? And I remember old people in Cavan saying that, like when I was young and sexy, and old gobshites would say, well, we go down and look at the lake. I'd be saying, why would you go down and look at the lake for, you know? And I looked at my woman and I said, yeah, let's do that. And we went down and we looked at the lake. And the lake was beautiful. And I saw a whole new world opening up to me. I saw the immeasurable power of love, that it's okay to be a man. It's okay to have all that darkness that a male has sometimes. A woman is an astonishing thing, and the way they engage with each other by approving of each other is what lifts shame. It lets go shame. And one of the things I wrote at the time, because I just write the old thing in the paper as a sort of a meditation on what's happening. And so I wrote this little moment of something that happened to me in the idea of shame and the lifting of shame by engaging with other people. And I'm going to read it now, and God, I hope I'm allowed to read it without being stopped, but anyway, I'll try. A few years ago, I got a letter in the post with photocopies of newspaper cuttings from a woman who felt that Stone Age religious laws had taken away her freedom and that nobody was listening. But she was too frightened even to put her name to what she wrote. So what could I do about that? Nothing. I'm not a political person. I don't get involved in politics. The great silence of death is the only thing that seems to ease pain. The pain inflicted by planes over Gaza, or the pain inflicted by the wrath of religious zealots, or any other political injustice. So there's nothing for me to do apart from being depressed about everything. And then I saw the story in the Irish Times about a pregnant Indian woman who died in an Irish hospital. Here it comes again, I thought. This unbearable shame of being an Irish male. It covers me. It immobilizes me so badly that I don't correct what ought to be corrected, and then that paralysis in turn adds further shame. I couldn't bear listening to the news about the death of Savita Halappanvar. Being in bed, I just went back to sleep. And when I got up, I was only half awake. I ate my dinner with closed eyes. I watched television with deaf ears, and I sat on the train to Dublin, enveloped in complete sorrow. And as the week went on, I couldn't bear the evening news. I couldn't bear the upset in people's voices on radio talk shows. I felt as if it was raining inside the house. There were big damp clouds in the hot press. It rained on the kitchen table. It rained on the television set. My bed floated on rising waters. It rained in my guts, behind my eyes, and in my soul. And by the end of the week, I was so immobilized that I spent hours sitting in an armchair, the one I took from my mother's house, where she used to sit and sometimes wished that the great silence of death would release her from the injustices and misery of this life. To cheer myself up, I went around hugging other people in the house, because there's always comfort and tenderness in others. Though I didn't grasp the ones I hugged with very much zest, it was as if I was in a parallel universe to them, as if the sun was shining on them and I was still standing in the rain. I saw the woman who died in Galway in a white dress, dancing on YouTube. She seemed intensely alive, whereas my clothes felt like the drapery of the grave. And the people around me in the supermarkets were like the sleeping damned in the underworld that they didn't even bother to resist. I felt lousy, like the man whose fridge stood outside an old house for over a decade until he opened the door and found a dead rat, and in the freezer box a fish that had turned to liquid. The smell was intense, but he knew it was a fish because 10 years earlier he had argued with his woman about who should clean it. She said he should at least clean the fridge. He never did. They fell apart. The fridge remained intact, silent and frozen through 10 winters, until he opened it again and discovered what human beings are capable of. And it's really funny, no matter what terrible injustice attends a death, the rest of us continue to forget. I personally know some corners of this country where people were executed and where the trees now look just so beautiful that I often wonder, was I dreaming all that blood in the long ago? But I suppose that's what politicians hope for, that we will forget about injustice so that they can continue to do nothing. But I didn't want to do nothing this time, like I always do. So I drove to Dublin to be part of the vigil for the woman who died in Galway. 20,000 people walked together in the rain, but it was the women I noticed, quietly moving towards the Parliament, pushing buggies and holding each other's arms with a silent dignity that reminded me of Dinach an Bhrón, a great poem by Martin O'Giron. And I felt, as I walked with them, that the shame in me was lifting. I was not immobile anymore. At last, at long last, I was doing something. I was walking with them.